Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. I know, it's been a while, but I have been really busy. I've been to NAB in Las Vegas, we wrapped up multiple short films, one of which is going to be released at the end of this month, and we also shot a couple of other projects, which I will also do breakdowns behind the scenes, so on and so forth on this channel in the very near future. And I also just returned from Cine Gear in Los Angeles, where I had the opportunity to take a closer look at the newly released Canon C400. Most of you here on YouTube know me as the Canon guy, because for most of my career I actually shot on Canon cameras. Not only the smaller mirrorless and DSLRs, but also the entire Cine line. I own the Canon C300 Mark III, the C500 Mark II, the C200 and multiple Canon C70s. But relatively recently I sold all of them. I got rid of my C70s, the C300, and I switched completely over to RED. And now the question is the new Canon C400 enough to make me switch back to Canon, sell all of my RED camera gear, or is it too little too late? So let's start talking about the Canon C400 in general. Let's just go over the specs and what this camera is all about. So first of all, it's the first full frame RF real cinema camera, except for the Canon R5C, which I'm shooting on right now. But now we have an actual Canon cinema camera with a full frame sensor. Not only is it a full frame RF mount sensor, but it also features a 6K sensor, which is also bigger than on the Canon C70 or on the Canon C300 Mark III, which was always something that I was hoping for, because I felt like the 4K on the Canon C70 is a bit on the softer side, so 6K is definitely welcomed. When it comes to the higher frame rate, I was a little disappointed because we only get 120 frames if we shoot in 4K, so you can shoot the full 6K sensor with 120 frames. Actually, you can shoot any modes in 6K other than RAW, which I don't really shoot that often because Canon RAW is not always worth it to shoot, and especially not if you're using Final Cut, because you can't basically adjust any of the RAW settings at all. Having said that, for all of my recent projects, narrative work, documentary, I never put my RED Komodo X in more than 60 frames, so the necessity isn't really there anymore anyway. Another really cool and new feature is the triple ISO. Now we have a native ISO of 800, 3200 and 12800, which is pretty cool for low light shooters, and if you do run and gun documentary work, you don't have to worry about your low light breaking down. Then again, on my Canon C70 or the Canon C300 Mark III, I never really felt like the low light is a big issue with this camera, but now having this opportunity with triple ISO is definitely great. The one thing that I probably like the most about the new Canon C400 is its form factor. I always liked the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II, but it was a little bit too big. Most of the times I don't need the full I/O with full-size XLRs, and I wanted to fly it on a gimbal, but it doesn't give us 100% clearance, especially if you use a bigger lens. And that is for all the smaller gimbals like the RS3 Pro or the RS4 Pro. And here with this new box style camera setup that is a little bit smaller than the C300 Mark III, it should work perfectly, and I think that this is the perfect size. Canon also claimed that they improved the autofocus on the Canon C400 and that it is now a lot better than on the Canon C70 and the Canon C300 Mark III. And although the autofocus of the Canon C70 was always great, it also lacked in some departments. It didn't spread out through the entire sensor size, so we only had about 80%, and if we used a speed booster, we only covered about 60%. And there were a lot of situations where I was shooting sports in contrast to outdoor situations, and the autofocus just didn't keep up. So now having this opportunity in a cinema camera to have an even better autofocus is actually pretty incredible. Another feature that stood out to me is that they went fully USB-C, which I really like. Not only for the side handle, so it is easier to just extend the side handle for gimbal use or shoulder rig mounts, and you don't have to use a proprietary cable, which is really expensive, but also for the onboard monitor. Granted, if I were to get this camera, I would probably never use this monitor because I never have on the Canon C300 Mark III or on the Canon C500 Mark II, because it's just too small and not bright enough, and I would always replace it with a 7-inch. The cool thing here now is that the USB-C not only transfers data but also power. So now what we could theoretically do is we could have Small HD implement a monitor camera control for Canon like they do on RED, and that would be absolutely amazing. The Canon engineer that I talked to said that it's theoretically possible, but there is nothing in the works right now. But again, maybe a third-party company like SmallHD will figure something out, and that would be pretty cool, because that is one thing that I really like about my Red camera, that I can control the entire camera via an external third-party monitor. Speaking of controlling the camera, that is also one thing that I really like about my Red camera that you can now do with Canon as well, and that is having an app for it. And the app looks absolutely amazing, and it looks pretty much like the Red app, and now you can control, change the settings and live view everything from your cinema camera, because it includes Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities, and that is a big improvement that I'm really excited about. So now the question is this the camera that we've all been waiting for, or is it a little too late? Because we already have the Sony FX6 and taking up a lot of the market shares, and the cameras are pretty similar. And I kinda agree, but I also disagree. If you have a close comparison to the new Canon C400 and the Sony FX6, they are somewhat similar, but I would always prefer the Canon C400. Yes, you have these incredible variable ND filters inside of the Sony, but I've said this multiple times that I would always prefer more NDs like the Canon C70 and the C300 Mark III that goes all the way up to 10 stops, because I've seen myself filming out in bright sunlight a lot, and I always need at least 8 stops of NDs, sometimes even indoors. The other factor with the variable ND filters of the Sony cameras is that they are variable ND filters, so you can't use a polarizer in front of your lens on top of it, because it won't work or you will get really funky artifacts. So I prefer the solid ND filters of the Canon C400. Also, one thing that is pretty cool is that they're a lot faster now. This was also something that was a bit annoying on the Canon C300 Mark III or the Canon C70, but now they are way faster. So for documentary run and gun work, that comes in really handy. The next big factor is the I/O, and this is where this camera just stands out from all the other cameras in my opinion, because we have a full I/O inside the camera. We don't have full-size XLRs, we only have mini XLRs, but I personally don't care about this at all, because you can just get an adapter or a cable, and that is basically just like the real thing. And we also have one SDI 12G, one SDI 3G, and an HDMI out. And if you do have an onboard monitor with USB-C, for example, you have 4 different monitor outs on one camera. And this is incredible, because for all of my recent projects, we always have multiple feeds going out from the camera to the director, to a client, or just for the focus puller. And it's always amazing to have these separated so that your client doesn't see your focus monitor peaking options, or you can just customize your screen the way that you want to have it and still get a clean feed to the client or the director. So this is probably the thing that I love about the camera the most. The form factor combined with a full-fledged I/O with multiple monitor outs as well as audio ports inside of the camera. In a perfect world, I would probably prefer a even more modular design where we could just get rid of all the ports that we don't need and then slap them on if we need them, like on my Red camera. But for this form factor, I'll take it. So now the question is, would I sell my Red camera for the Canon C400? And if so, why? The biggest reason for me would be the combination of a full frame sensor with the RF mount, because I can easily adapt this to either EF or PL. And I currently shoot a lot on EF lenses, but there's also a lot of great PL options out there. And then if I wanted to go full autofocus with a small handheld setup, I could also use native RF lenses. Having a full frame sensor with the RF mount and internal ND filters is an absolute game changer. Because the one thing that annoys me about my Red camera the most is the problem with the ND filters. Because yes, we have multiple options and all of them are great, but they always have compromises. I have the Kippa Revolver, which basically is almost an internal ND filter, and it works great, but it only works with certain lens mounts. I can't use a speed booster, and some of the PL lenses also won't work with the filter because we have a protruding element in the back of the lens. So we could go fully front filters, but then we have a problem on a gimbal because that makes the entire setup really heavy, and it also makes it a lot slower. So ND filters have always been a big headache when working with the Red camera in faster paced environments. This is where the Canon C400 would shine. I could use all the lenses that I want, anamorphics as well as PL, EF, RF, and I wouldn't have to worry about any kind of ND filters whatsoever. So yes, the Canon C400 sounds like an absolute amazing all-around camera. And a couple years ago, this would have been absolutely perfect for me, as I was doing a lot of client work, running gun documentaries, and this camera probably excels at everything. Right now, where I'm doing more slow-paced narrative projects, I always work with at least a smaller crew, so we do have a bit more time, and we also have a focus puller on every set. All these new features might not be as interesting to me as some of the other features. So for me personally, it comes down to a couple of things. Number one, image quality. Obviously, I haven't had the time to actually use this camera out in the field and shoot with it, grade it, and edit it afterwards. So this is something I want to see for myself. But number two, and this is probably more important for me, is the lens choices. Currently, I shoot a lot on cine zooms, and those are all Super 35, like the Sigma 18-35 or the Tokina 11-20. And of course, I could take the Canon C400, put it into Super 35 mode and still use these lenses with it. But then again, where's the point? And why would I take a full frame camera and only shoot in Super 35 mode? So here I would really have to think about, do I really want to sell everything I have, the red as well as all of my cine zooms and the Super 35 lenses that I already have, and go fully full frame and also go with a lot of full frame lenses? I'm not sure yet. I like the full frame look, I like the options that it gives me, but I also like the options that I have right now with my Super 35 lenses and the setup that I have right now. So it also comes down to what am I going to shoot in the near future. Like I already said, there's going to be a lot of content on this YouTube channel, narrative work, documentaries, breakdowns, and I'm not 100% sure if I need to switch, but this camera looks so amazing that it might be enticing because, like I said, this camera can do it all. So I can't wait to get my hands on it and actually shoot with it in the near future, and then we'll see what happens. So now I want to know from you, should I sell my red cameras and go back to Canon? And if so, why? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because like I said, there will be a lot of content also about the Canon C400, regardless if I buy it or not, but also a lot of cool projects like our short film that we will upload at the end of the month. And I hope to see you on the next one.